Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to check to see if we're okay to get going, and it sounds like we are. We have a full agenda this morning in government oversight, so without further ado, I'm going to ask my co-chair if she has any comments before we kick off the informational forum on the audit of State Election Enforcement Commission. She's good. Our ranking member is over there. I think he's good. Ranking member Sampson? No comments? Thank you. We're all good. So I think with that, let's go ahead and kick off our meeting. And first up, we're going to hear from the auditors of public accounts. I see Lisa and her team over here. Good morning, ladies. Nice to see the strong female team supporting the auditors this morning. If you could introduce yourself, and then what I was hoping to do is just kind of jump right into some of the audit procedures that you all did, and just maybe spend a few minutes kind of giving an overview of your procedures that you did as part of your audit.
Good morning, Senator Gadkar-Wilcox, Representative Dathan, Senator Sampson, Representative Carney, and members of the Government Oversight Committee. For the record, I am Lisa Daly, Deputy State Auditor. We are happy to be here today to discuss the audit of the State Elections Enforcement Commission covering the fiscal years 2022 and 2023. I would like to introduce Jennifer Corbin, Associate Auditor, who led the audit. Jennifer also works on the audit of the Department of Administrative Services. Also here is Maura Pardo, Administrative Auditor. Maura leads one of our divisions, which includes performance audits and whistleblowers. State Auditor Craig Minor recused himself from review and approval of the audit report. Since State Auditor Minor served in the General Assembly during the audited period, out of an abundance of caution, he recused himself to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. State Auditor John Garagosian sends his regrets that he could not be here this morning. Our goal is to make government better. This audit was essentially a compliance audit. We audit every state and quasi-public agency every 2 years, and we review whether they are following state laws, regulations, policies, and have adequate internal controls in place. This audit report included 8 recommendations, of which 4 were repeated from the previous audit. Our prior audit report had 7 recommendations, of which 3 have been implemented or otherwise resolved. The section of the report following the audit findings explains the areas that we addressed in the audit. They included payroll and personnel, revenue and cash receipts, purchasing and expenditures, asset management, reporting systems, information technology, post-election audits, election complaint investigations, and citizens election program grants. And we would be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you so much. Just for the folks at home watching, this audit was released in July 2025, so your field work finished right before then? Is that correct?
A few months before then.
Okay.
It had to go through management review.
Got it. And so your review was for the period 22-23. Have you commenced to work for 24 and 25 yet, or is that scheduled?
It's on the schedule. We have not started it yet, though.
Okay. I noticed that you found some findings in regards to some of the reports and over some of the audits that the agency did for the 2020 and 22 election cycle. I think the first finding highlighted that, in the sort of key time period of this audit, 92% of the audits were not complete sort of almost 3 years later. Is that correct?
Jennifer Corbin, the 92% was for the 2022 election cycle
Right.
audits. And yes, at the time of our audit work, that is correct. They hadn't been completed yet.
Okay. Did the agency give an answer why those hadn't been completed?
Yes, the agency did provide a response for our audit, and I'm going to just read that back to you here.
Sounds good.
We disagree with the finding in part. Due to staffing shortages and changes in the termination date for selected candidate committees chosen for audit, the staff has less than 6 months to obtain records and information controlled by committees. Once received, they must commence post-election reviews in this short time frame, both before the start of the new election cycle, as well as prior to the statutory prohibition on the release of audits prior to an election.
So of the 98 ones that were selected, they are presumably have reviewed 100% of the donations in that time period. So when you are reviewing their audit work, you can see that they have done all the review of donations that's come in. It's more of the audit of the expenditures. Is that correct?
For this, we just looked at the completion of the audits. Because they weren't completed, we didn't do any further review of their work for those.
So that's a pretty material, that 92% of the items that you were selecting couldn't even be audited. Is that what I'm understanding?
So we don't necessarily audit their audits. We do make sure that they are following their procedures for those audits, but yes, because they weren't even completed, we weren't able to look back at how they performed that work.
So how, in terms of the work that you did do, how did you substantiate that the commission is able to do what's intended of the organization to keep our elections clean and fair?
I'm sorry, can you kind of clarify what?
Sure. I'm
Yeah.
thinking if you only were able to review 8% of all the audits that were completed, how are you able to opine on the agency overall for doing what it's supposed to be doing?
I think that's highlighted. I'm Maura Pardo. I think that's highlighted in our effect is, they initially told us that they had not completed 92%. So we just took a look-see at some of the reports that were done just to see how late they were. And we did find they were between 132 and 454 days late. And then our effect kind of highlights what we believe happens when the condition happens. And that is when they don't complete the audits, there's an increased risk that state elections enforcement and the candidate committee may not resolve audit issues, and the public may not be informed before the next election.
Exactly. Did you, as the auditor's public accounts, provide any suggestions or management comments to the agency to help them facilitate work going forward?
I wish we could do that. At this time, we just recommended that they should complete the post-election audits within the statutory deadline. They said in their response, they have admitted that they have trouble completing their statutory reports within the deadline. So then, we think there might need to be, if they believe that's true, then they may need to work with the legislature to amend the legislation, is the best we could do.
Which is what happened last year. And of course, that was not part of this audit period. I'm going to let my colleagues here have some questions before I go on and ask more. Senator?
Thank you very much for being here. So I did have just a follow-up on that. So this was also for recommendation 1, that this is a repeated offense. It looks like a pretty significant number, that 92% of the audits were not complete. Was that the case in the past violations? Is that Was that unusual? So, and given that this is repeated, if you can say a little bit more about the context of previous audits and what percentage was complete, if it was similar or if this somehow stands out.
So for previous audits, because of the timing, they weren't able to kind of look at that many audits. So that part of it was unique to this particular audit cycle.
Sorry, can you explain that?
Yeah, so the audit deadline is based on whether or not a candidate is going to be in the next election as well. So in that case, they have to have it done. They can't finish the audit any later than 2 months before that election day. And because of, I believe the previous audit had done their work in 2021, they weren't able to then look at the 2022 audit to see if there were 2020 audits that had been completed past that deadline.
Oh, okay. What about the one prior to that?
I'm not, unfortunately,
Okay.
sure about that.
And if you can say a little bit more about finding two, what is it that could be done to increase those internal controls?
For this one, the agency, in their response, they did say that they had appointed one of their staff attorneys as the information policy coordinator. And so it may just have been that there wasn't a point person to organize all of that data and get it into those reports. Obviously, the executive director will be able to give you some more information on how they handled that.
And do you have any other recommendations for them in terms of is it just a matter of, I was wondering if this, the software licensing or if, shifting to, some kind of updating a data system where they're able to process things in a way that's more effective. I mean, I don't know if you have any recommendations on how you strengthen internal controls to make things more efficient or effective.
Well, certainly they should follow the Office of the State Comptroller's State Accounting Manual that helps, set forth all the internal controls that agencies should have followed to, account for software inventory and personnel matters, documenting overtime, personnel actions, things like that. So we've always referred to that as our criteria for internal controls.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Appreciate it. And thank you, ladies, for being here this morning. I think the audit report kind of stands on its own. It speaks for itself. So there's not a whole lot that I would want to ask you guys. And of course, in this particular case, when we're dealing with SEEC, we have new leadership. So it's one of those things where I imagine our new executive director will tell us that he's going to address these issues if they still exist. Do you have any idea, and again, I know when this audit was issued and for the period it was issued for was in the past, but do we have any sense of the reaction of the leadership at the time and whether or not they were making an effort to address these items through you, Madam Chairman?
When obviously we do give them all of these, all the findings, and they're able to provide us a response. There was a sense that, yes, they're aware that these are issues and that they would like to address them, but also kind of a sense that they were kind of between a rock and a hard place in terms of what they were required to do, combined with the fact that it's a small agency with limited personnel.
Thank you for that. Through you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, no, I completely understand it. I mean, I've heard some of these things, from the previous leadership of the SEC, and we did make an effort, obviously, to change some policy. Although I've got to say that the personnel matters, the management of the agency side of things, I've never heard about before. And my concern about these audits always is the same thing, which is, we go and we find this information, and you guys dig in and you come up with this very nice report, but then what? If the agency doesn't follow through and make changes, then who cares? I mean, and that's where I think we need to find some new perspective about how we're going to address some of these items. So I'm very curious to hear the new executive director, how he plans on tackling these things. But I think that now that we have a government oversight committee and we have, a more robust, maybe not robust enough, but a more robust system to bring these things into the light, I think maybe that will add a little bit of pressure to these agencies to be more responsible as far as some of this internal management goes. I did want to ask one thing, which may seem like a really small thing given this report, which is the issue of the controllable assets. And I feel like this is something that's going on all through state government. And I just like your reaction to maybe the question about how significant a problem is this, maybe not just in the SEEC audit that we're looking at, but across state government. And what do we do about it when you're missing, $5,718 worth of controlled assets? Like this audit says, doesn't seem like a lot, but I imagine that it could be a lot more in some cases. What happens? Do we ever recover these items? Is there a next step beyond the audit through you, Madam Chairman? Sorry.
Well, it is a very common audit finding. We see it in most of our audit reports. Some agencies will eventually find these items. If they do not, then they are supposed to send in a loss report to our office in the comptroller's office. They're required to do an annual physical inventory of all of their items. Some agencies are not doing that. And then sometimes a few years will happen, then they'll get caught up, do the inventory, and that's when they realize that they can't find something. So it definitely is a widespread problem. And I think it varies. When you have a very large agency, it's much harder to keep track of those items. When you have different locations, smaller agencies, probably less so. But there are policies and procedures in the state property control manual that the comptroller's office issues that agencies are supposed to be following.
Through you, Madam Chairman, thank you for that. I noticed that in all of the audit reports, you identify the problem, you explain the response from the specific agency, maybe they have a reason for things, and you also provide a recommendation, which I think is fabulous. And I appreciated the response earlier to the chairman about the lack of completion of all the audits, and maybe the solution is changing the policy, more staffing. Those things are very reasonable to discuss. But in this particular case, and I'm not down on you guys at all for saying this, it just says that the commission should develop policies and procedures to properly tag and record controllable assets. For me, that's not really enough from a policy standpoint. I think that we need to have a mechanism to protect the property owned by the residents of Connecticut, paid for with their tax dollars. So I'm putting that on your radar as maybe something to think about, giving us a little more in the sense of recommendations that the legislature can take on all audit findings, but in particular that one. Because I'm concerned there's a great deal of taxpayer-funded assets that get lost, quote unquote, each year across state government. And I'm not picking on SEEC. This is a small amount for one thing, and and it was a few years ago, so we don't really know what the story is. But I just wanted to put that out there for you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. That actually raises one of my questions, Senator, so thank you. You said 17 assets totaling $5,700. What is the capitalization policy of the agency? Because that seems like really small number of things that would be capitalized.
So these were not capital assets. For the state of Connecticut, the comptroller's property control manual, that is a $5,000. However, they are also for items that are under that, but expected to be used for a reasonable amount of time, over a year. They are supposed to be tracking them as controllable assets. So they aren't capital assets, but they are things that are, often it's small electronics. For this audit, it was monitors, projectors, printers, recorders. that are small, theft-prone, but expensive enough that they do want to keep track of them. None of these were capital assets. They were all controllable.
Controllable. Thank you for clarifying that. Are you aware if the SEEC has developed a policy to tag and record these controllable assets in the future?
We did not, they had not developed one as of the completion of this audit, but one of our standard audit procedures is that when you go into a new audit, one of the first things you do is you follow up on all prior audit funding, so that will be something that will be looked at the start of the next audit.
One of my favorite jobs when I was an auditor. Thank you. Any questions from our ranking? No? Oh, Representative Gucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And a real quick question. As somebody who has personal experience with the audit and the audit issues as far as we've gone with SEEC, did you find that COVID had anything to do with some of your findings and some of the explanations as to why? Because I know, given the time period we're talking about, we had just really just started getting into our second year of dealing with COVID.
For SEEC, not as much as other agencies. One of the things that came up when we started our audit is that they did get back into in-person work fairly quickly. Changes were some stuff switched over to electronic documentation, but primarily for these, I don't think it was hugely affected by the COVID pandemic.
All right, well, thank you. I just wanted to kind of see if that, I know in some of the other audits we've done, we have found that that was a contributing factor. So I'm not sure with the new world that we found ourselves in with remote, non-remote, in, out, et cetera, if that had played into any of these deficiencies. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. One last question, and I'm going to double check there's no one online that has questions, but I know you said you kind of go back to the previous findings of an audit report as part of your initial procedures. I know we had several open reports and audits that were done prior to the audit here that were still open. As part of your field procedures, did you look at prior audits and to see what the status was of those audits were when you started your field work? So any sort of candidate account, any candidate committees that from like 2018 or before?
We limited our review to the 2020 and 2022 audits.
So you didn't, because you had that prior comment, and I was looking at on your, I think it was comment 3, comment 3 from the prior period, and it was modified obviously here, but it seems like there was also open audits when you had done your previous audit field work, and I was just wondering if that was followed up on. So it was comment number 3. SEEC should complete its post-election review of candidate committees within the statutory deadlines. And so as it came up in a prior audit, I was just wondering, as part of your audit procedures, when you started the new audit, if you verified that those audits of those earlier open committees had been completed.
What I think we probably asked SEEC is how they resolved the matter, and we did not repeat the section of the prior audit response that required repayment of grant funds to the Citizens Election Fund. So I can't speak to the specific documentation, but they presented us with enough evidence that we resolved that portion of the finding. But typically, if they can provide us with evidence that they sufficiently resolved those prior audits, but I'm not sure if we know exactly how many audits of the prior audit they did follow up on. Do you know that
No, to clarify, we didn't look at any of the 2018 ones. I don't remember when they said they finished those off the top of my head. I do apologize.
Okay. I think when I'm thinking about your next audit, bearing in mind we had 92% of the audits you couldn't even do any procedures on, I'm hoping that in the next audit that you do for fiscal years 24 and 25, that you will do some procedures on those audits just to make sure that those have been done appropriately. My last question is, the SEEC very helpfully gave us an update at the end of 2025, which is the information reported pursuant to Public Act 25-26 regarding the open post-election reviews of candidate committees. Does the agency share that with you so that you can kind of see where they are kind of ongoing as you plan your next audit procedures and audit work that you're going to do for the next audit?
That would be one of the first things we would ask for as we start planning for our next audit, but we wouldn't ask for it until we're about to start that audit.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I think with that, is there anybody online that has any questions? I don't see any. Oh, our ranking member, Carney.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I apologize for being a little bit tardy. And I apologize if this was already asked. I just have one question, and I don't know if you can answer or not. Do you think that the SEEC has the capacity to perform as many audits as they are supposed to do, or should they cut down on the audits? Because, I find, and I'll ask the SEC this, there's probably not a lot of campaigns that there are serious issues with post-election. In my campaigns, there have been little things here and there, but nothing that warrants, additional review or fines or anything like that. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
I think that'd be a question for the SEEC to answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Well, I think with that, I know you have some testimony in the public hearing coming up, so you'll probably stick around for that. But if there are further questions as part of the informational hearing, if you can stay ready, that would be great. So thank you so much. And with that transition, we are going to have our folks from the SEEC come up. Thank you very much, and welcome, Mr. Executive Director Burns. If you could introduce yourself, and would love to kind of get in and start talking about the audit. I know this is before your time, so if you can give folks at home maybe a little kind of explanation of what's been happening within the agency for the last several months since this audit has occurred.
Absolutely, and thank you. Madam Chairs Gadker, Wilcox, and Dathan, Ranking Members Sampson and Carney, and Vice Chairs McCrory and Gucker, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Ryan Burns. I am the Executive Director and General Counsel for the State Elections Enforcement Commission. Since I joined in late December 2025, obviously the most recent audit report has been something we've been taking very seriously. One of the major focuses has been on the audit reports, which has been a major discussion here. What I'm happy to report is, of all outstanding audits, there are only 34 remaining open across the agency, 8 covering the 2022 election cycle and 26 covering the 2024. All of those audits are scheduled, and we plan to have all of those resolved by May of this year, which would be the cutoff for the new election cycle. So we should have all audits within the agency resolved by May of this year. That is a major priority, and I know it's been a major concern of the legislature. Just a couple of notes on causality, because I want to make sure that this committee is aware of some of the consequences of us moving more quickly. For the 2022 and 2024 audit cycle, we're going to treat those in a fairly consistent manner with all the other audits that happened over that same period. But for 2026, There's been a slight change in how the deadlines affect. Not only are we reduced to a 20% audit, but we're also limited to closing all audits within 1 year of when we schedule the lottery to select those committees for that audit. When we audit a committee, we try to work very closely with those committees to keep them out of our enforcement unit. And while many treasurers, including many of the treasurers for the candidates and representatives here, are very diligent, not all treasurers have the same capabilities. And most of them are volunteers that have day jobs. And so gathering all the paperwork that's required for us to assess whether or not the public money has been spent appropriately can take time, and sometimes they have to contact a bank and the bank's slow. So a lot of the delay is us trying to work with treasurers to keep them out of a finding when it's really just a matter of giving them more time to give us the documents they need. So unfortunately, with this new one-year deadline that was imposed by 2526, we're not going to be able to be as generous with those continuances because we're going to have to get those audit findings out the door more quickly, which may result in more referrals, unfortunately. That doesn't mean that there's going to be more findings or more penalties, but obviously anytime a treasurer hears referral to the enforcement unit, that creates some anxiety. And unfortunately, we just don't have any other tools to prevent that given the deadlines that surround this situation. So that is something we've been focused on. With regard to the controllable assets, I'll say in 2024, we expanded our fiscal unit from 1 to 3. So we now have more people, even within the limited resources of the agency. We wanted to focus on making sure that our fiscal house was in order. So now we have 3 different sets of eyes on all of our financial transactions. We have proper structure, so no one person is controlling any one fund, and there's double sign-off to make sure there isn't misappropriation. With regard to the one finding on the controllable assets, my understanding, obviously, was, while I was not with the agency, was that there was a misunderstanding for one reason or another over what assets were considered controllable. So that misunderstanding has been resolved, and we expect, if not in the 2024-25 audit, certainly in the 2026-27, that issue will be completely resolved. We are currently doing a complete inventory, not just of our controllable assets, but all of our full technology stack, and going through and making sure that all of our licenses are appropriately apportioned, and that we have the appropriate resources to accomplish our mission.
Well, that's music to my ears. What is the, is there a dollar threshold for controllable assets for it to be considered a controllable asset? Is it just the nature of the type of asset it is?
I would have to get back to you on that. My understanding is that it is a mix of the type of asset and the value. Certain assets have lower thresholds by which they have to be controllable, but certainly I would defer to our auditors of public accounts for a definitive answer on that.
So it's like a calculator versus a monitor, probably.
I would defer to the
Okay,
auditors.
got it. Well, I will say I was very happy to get on time. I think I got it on New Year's Eve, your 25-26 report, which I did read actually that day because I was had a few minutes in between things. And so I was pleased to see that you did have improved and getting through these audits fairly, a lot more judiciously. If you were to give the committee an update, at 12/31, you had 70% of the 2024 audits completed. And for 2022, you had 82%. You didn't comment on the 2020, and I was just wondering if you could give the committee an update on where you stand as of today on those 3 election cycles.
So as of even that report, you were not reported on 2020 because they were 100% complete. There may still be lingering enforcement matters that resulted from those audits, but there are no lingering audits concerning 2020. Of the 179 selected committees for the 2022 cycle, 8 remain, and of the 164 selected for the 2024 cycle, 26 remain. And as I'm an attorney, I'm not going to do math on the spot.
That's sensible for everybody. So when you say that there are enforcement issues outstanding, like for 2020, if you could maybe provide the committee a understanding of the type of enforcement issues that are out there and what we're doing to help our treasurers make sure that we don't stumble upon those issues going forward, because we are talking about, you know, funds that could potentially go to other general fund activities, so that people understand. I think, you know, I know in my time up here and going through 4 different election cycles, you know, being a treasurer is really hard work, and it's something that, you know, when you get a treasurer, that they take that job very responsibly. And it seems to me that the treasurers that I've worked with all do that. But I think, you know, one of the jobs of the agencies is to make sure that treasurers know what they need to do along the way. And I know we have a CEP guide that has been done in the past. We're still waiting for our 2026 election cycle CEP guide. I know you said last week that it was still in the review process. And so I just want to make sure that our treasurers have everything that they need to do their jobs, and that, you know, things that may have come up in the past that you have, you know, additional sort of work that you need to do, not necessarily in the audit, but on those outstanding items. What we're doing to facilitate our treasurers to do good work going forward, but also what are we doing to make sure that we resolve all those issues that are outstanding with these prior elections?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different aspects to that question, so let me take piece by piece. With regard to the CEP guide, which is probably our most important educational document that we provide in statewide seasons, that draft has been provided to our commission, who will be reviewing it at our meeting tomorrow. So unless there are major revisions that come from our commission, we hope to have that out within the week and available. And per 2526, it'll also be provided to the appropriate legislative leaders simultaneously with our public release. And certainly we would welcome any questions or concerns that that document would raise. But that, with the advent of 2526, a major rewrite was required because there was major structural changes to the program, in addition to leadership transitions that obviously created some confusion within the agency over how to approve certain policy changes. So I can say the staff has been working diligently to get that document out, and we are excited for the public to finally see it once it's ready very soon. With regard to what types of issues that we see coming out of audits, it really runs the gamut. Again, some are very small items that are just audit findings and never referred to enforcement. Couldn't find a receipt for a small dollar value item. Sometimes it's can't find a receipt for very large value items. Those are problems. Sometimes it's a matter of not distributing physical assets, just like we have controllable assets here, campaigns not properly selling those assets and giving the money back to the CEF, but having those assets used by other committees improperly. There's whether or not there were discovery of straw contributions even after the fact. So yes, those are important to resolve quickly. In the enforcement unit, I will say the enforcement unit's docket of active cases, and I can walk you through those numbers as well, is significantly smaller than it had been even at the beginning of 2024, and we are working efficiently to move through those cases. But as with all cases, campaign finance is just a small piece of the broader election enforcement universe that we live in, and large investigations that involve numbers of resources can waylay some of our more traditional campaign finance audit cases. So it's a matter of balancing, and we're still working on finding that perfect balance, and we're continuing looking to improve. But that is the current situation.
Got it. I think, yeah, that guide will be helpful so that, you know, like you said, if you, and treasurer knows that they need to keep a receipt for, $5 worth of copies, then they need to do that. And this guidance is really critical, especially we're 4 months into the 2026 election cycle, and people are getting ready for primaries and things like that.
Yeah, and to follow up on that point, it is an important piece, but not the only piece of education that we offer. We have each candidate has a dedicated elections officer that they can call any business hours to our agency, and we can answer specific questions. And we also offer candidate training and treasurer training to any treasurer that asks, and we have them scheduled throughout the year. So we really do our best to be a resource, not just an enforcer of the election laws. And if there's any questions, we really want to be there to help those candidates and treasurers through the process.
I will say that your agency does an amazing job at that. I have had great luck myself talking to folks and ask questions about, forming the campaign or any sort of issues that come up. My treasurer relies greatly on your staff, which have done some great things. One thing, as an aside, I noticed the governor added a head count in your agency as part of his budget. I didn't get an understanding what that head count was for. Is there somebody specific?
So again, that was before my time. There were some positions that had been moved around. As an independent agency, we have slightly more independence on kind of where we put agencies. Right now, the last position we are filling is for an accounts examiner to fulfill audit requirements. But whether or not that's total headcount has changed, or whether that was an attorney that moved over to enforcement and then we're refilling, I'd have to get back to you on as to total headcount change within the
Yeah,
attorney
it's
units.
36
Yes.
is what he's proposing, and currently I understand it's 35.
So it is, no, our current headcount is 36 with a vacancy, and we just made an offer on that last accounts examiner.
Got it. I'm going to let my other colleagues ask questions. Senator Gatker.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for being here. I just want to follow up on the point about the campaign treasurers, and also just to echo the points made by my chair, by our chair, about the fact that it's very difficult to be a treasurer, right? So it's confusing. People are volunteering, and a big thank you to those who step up to do that in the first place. And thank you to your office, because that informational piece of really being there, to provide resource and to provide information is extremely helpful, especially when people are newer to the role, and even for people who've been doing it for a while. So now that we've asked for a list of items, I think part of the problem with the treasurers, they didn't always know what was going to be a part of the audit or what to expect. So I presume that list is going to be in the new booklet that's coming out, the CEP.
In
Okay.
multiple places.
In multiple-
We're
perfect.
going to have a separate list that will be separately published on our website and provided to the legislature, and that list will also be within that guidebook itself. In addition to anyone that calls, we can recite it to them. So yes, it will be very clear what documentation we require as part of our audits.
And then treasurers aren't to expect to be expected to retain anything beyond that list, right? So that list will then be really clear. Will that help expedite the process?
We hope so.
Okay.
Again, we're providing the information to the treasurers and providing whatever guidance and encouragement we can, but ultimately it's up to the treasurers to effectuate that guidance. Obviously, it's always our expectation, the more education and assistance we can provide, the more fluid our end process is. But as with any bell curve of a group of people, we have people that are very capable and have the time and experience, and we have some where this isn't the right fit for them, and that's where we spend the most of our time. So we hope that this additional assistance will be helpful, but we'll have to wait and see.
But I just want to be clear about the list. That list is an exhaustive list, meaning if it's not on that list and treasurers don't keep documentation, they're not going to be asked to provide documentation on anything beyond the list that's provided, which makes it transparent from the beginning, I think, for them as well.
That is correct.
That's the process going forward.
That's correct.
Okay, so everything will be provided. Great. And when did you say that is likely to come out?
Within the next week. It
within
is
the
our
next week.
expectation. We have a commission meeting tomorrow. That commission is reviewing the draft of our guidebook. Unless there's major changes required by the commission, we expect to release it shortly thereafter.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, and I did have a question about so great that you said, I think you said every single case will be resolved by May in this upcoming, every
All of
audit.
our audits.
Every
yeah,
audit
all of
will
our
be-
audits will be resolved
Right.
by May. It is our expectation. I can't give a guarantee until the
Right.
last one goes out the door.
Except-
But that is our plan, and we have built-in buffer time to make sure that's achieved.
Great, and that's terrific. And that's a dramatic shift from 92% not being complete, right? So I guess my question then is, because this is before the reduction to the 20% in audits, relatively same staffing, I guess if you can talk about both ends, that 92%, I know that was before your time, so you're speaking a little bit about what was before your time, so I apologize to the extent that you can provide information, what explains, and that's pretty significant. Even with staffing shortages, 92% not being complete. To me, if you can sort of explain that, and then on the other hand, I appreciate the speed, but the concern then is, how are we able to catch up so quickly with the same resources and the same, because the audits haven't been reduced until the new 2026 cycle. So yeah, what accounts for that disparity? Because I appreciate the speed, but is that coming at the cost of actual oversight? You know, how do we go from one pole to the other?
So a couple of things I want to note on that. First is absolutely we are not compromising the integrity of our audits. That is essential to our processes going forward. Again, I wasn't here for a good portion of that, and I can't take credit personally for a lot of the improvement that's happened. Simply, I'm riding the horse to the finish line at this point. But what I will say is that there were some legal questions that had to be answered that were being answered on a one-off basis that now we've got more systematic solutions. So that question doesn't need to be answered in a different way every time it comes up. But one other point I want to make is, especially for the 2022s, just because we're going to be 100% complete doesn't mean we're 100% complete on time, which I believe was the audit finding. So I expect, even for the 24s, which will be completed by May, there's going to be a finding in our 2024-2025 audit that's going to show a large chunk weren't completed within that first year, because we are now just completing the 2024s now. So again, I just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. That's not saying we are moving forward diligently to make sure that we have things completed timely. And then going into our 2026 audits, we won't have any backlog. And again, we have the reduced number of audits, so our expectation is we'll be able to move through them more diligently. But again, the biggest change we've made is we're not being as flexible with treasurers on continuances. That's really the change, and unfortunately, that does mean some more referrals to our enforcement unit to resolve issues on that side, but it is the cost of having to get these things resolved timely.
Right. No, I appreciate this, yeah, and of course with resource constraints, I appreciate the situation you're in, but that there's still oversight on it, but the timely processing is extremely helpful. And I did want to talk about, and I appreciate your comments on the structural change, because I imagine that's a part of it. If you could say a little bit more about that. You mentioned that you changed the structure so that multiple people sort of have the authority maybe to have the final say on, if you can say a little bit more about that. And what is that based on? That the system isn't funneled to one person, I think you said. What was sort of slowing down the process when you had to have authorization signed only by one person and you've distributed that a little bit? You just mentioned it previously.
No, so it was multiple questions needed to be, I think there were multiple legal questions that hadn't been answered in a holistic way. Again, due to multiple changes in leadership. So a lot of questions were being answered on an ad hoc basis because of the lack of permanent legal leadership at the agency. So now that there is permanent legal leadership at the agency, policy calls can be made in a much more cohesive way rather than dealing with cases more in like a whack-a-mole type situation. So that was really, so it's not about having centralized to one person. It's more about being able to answer questions more holistically.
Okay, and then multiple, and you sort of establish a protocol that everybody can refer to instead of waiting for that one person to get back to someone. Was that the change then?
So so there's both more protocols on who's responsible for funneling what information up to the top,
And is there more distribution on the top, or does it still funnel to like a single 1 or 2 people?
I think what we've done is reduce the number of questions that have to come to the top.
Okay.
So
Okay, that's
once that
helpful.
we've answered a question, we don't have to answer it again. That's really, the goal is to spend significant time answering a question once and then not revisiting it unless we really have to.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And we talked about this previously, but one of my, my biggest concerns is distinguishing between the types of violations and how much time gets spent on them and what are the protocols. So, to me, there's a big difference between a $5 donation from a young person that was put on their parents' credit card, and we have to sort that out. That's different than if there's some tampering, right, with either contributions or with absentee ballots, and there's some allegation there. And it seemed like with the backlog, if we're backlogged on the latter, that then affects the election and the integrity of the elections. Whereas with the former, maybe the protocol doesn't have to be the same to investigate. So if you could say a little bit about how different violations are treated differently, and maybe what goes into the investigation, particularly of those serious allegations, because I know it takes some time, and sometimes the public is like, is anything happening here? But being a litigator and being a procedural person, process just takes time. But for the public, if you can explain a little bit about particularly what that protocol is around very serious allegations, and what the steps are, how long that takes, what the steps are to investigate those, and how that's sort of distinguished in terms of resources from, a $5 contribution that is improper.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer. So again, we're talking about our enforcement unit, not our audit unit. So within our enforcement unit, we have some very talented investigators and attorneys that often have to do their work kind of behind the scenes out of necessity. So when a complaint comes in, or when we initiate a complaint or receive a referral from an elections official, the first thing that happens is staff will review this to see if it's even within our jurisdiction. We do that review, and then we may do an initial outreach to the complainant just to get some more background information. If it's within our jurisdiction and it's a significant enough violation to warrant any resources being expended on it, it will then be provided to the commission for a finding that it's necessary to investigate. The commission staff is prohibited from doing any investigation until that finding is made. At that point, an attorney and an investigator are assigned to the case as leads, and that the attorney assigned will do a prioritization, understanding whether or not public funds were used, the amount of funds that may have been used, whether or not there was a tampering with the process of voting, whether or not that tampering may have had an impact on the outcome of the voting. And so we have a number of different prioritization factors that the attorneys will assess, and then request additional resources if the investigator and attorney are insufficient to do that. A complete review of absentee ballots in a large municipality will by necessity require far more resources than investigating whether or not there were a small number of improper contributions through straws. So that is the initial assessment, and then if additional resources are needed, those will be funneled up to our new enforcement director, which was recently created, to give more oversight to that unit and make sure that the resources are used appropriately and moving through our system. And if violations are found, that case will then be brought back to our commission with a request to offer a settlement. The vast majority of violations will either result in a low-dollar settlement or some other agreement with the parties. In a small number of cases, we will have to move forward with an administrative hearing where each side has full uniform Administrative Procedure Act rights, and it would be before one of the commissioners, and then the final decision would be approved by the commission as a whole. That whole process can take 4 to 6 months. So with our 1 year to resolve complaints, that really only gives us about 6 months to dig in on an investigation.
Can you say a little bit more about, is every violation open to a settlement? Are those settlements public? Does the public know sort of what was settled? And are more egregious violations, are there some violations where a settlement is not on the table because it's so egregious that it goes to further prosecution? Or
Absolutely. So all of our resolutions are public. They're published on our website, settlement or otherwise. We've had some fairly significant violations that have resulted in settlements, in large 5 and 6-figure settlements that were still, I think, the appropriate resolution. But if the conduct veers into the criminal, that's when our partnerships with our law enforcement agencies come into play. We have strong relationships with municipal, state, and federal law enforcement, and those collaborations often go without public notice, and that's by design. So if we are collaborating with a law enforcement agency on an investigation, often at the request of that law enforcement agency, we won't make any public statements about that relationship or about that investigation to allow them to investigate without signaling to witnesses to collaborate on their statements or to destroy evidence. So that there are certainly cases in which we would not settle.
Thank you. And I know we have to wrap up, and we're going to go to our public hearing, which you'll continue to be there. So if I have any follow-up questions, I might, about the enforcement director position in particular, I might follow up then. But thank you very much. I think this is helpful for me, and also I think helpful for the public to understand what this process looks like. So I really appreciate your comments.
You're welcome.
Thank you to the good co-chair. And I did want to say Senator Sampson had to go to another meeting. There's multiple meetings happening right now in this building. But he did want me to pass on to you that he's really glad that you're on board. He's glad of you and your team, how seriously you've taken this audit, and appreciates everything that you're doing and the work, and looking forward to hearing the results of the next audit. So with that, any other questions? Yeah. Okay. I think we're good for now, and then we're going to close this informational session, and we're going to give ourselves a couple minutes to get ready for the public hearing, which will commence, we'll say, at 11:05. Thank you very much.